Good afternoon. The mic is working now. Once it hears, then recognizes someone speaking. I just wanted to welcome you folks to the Turchin Center for the Visual Arts. My name is Hank Foreman, and I serve Appalachian as the Associate Vice Chancellor for University Communications and Cultural Affairs. And I'm also the Director and Chief Curator of the Turchin Center. So we're really thrilled to have this exhibition and the concurrent programs here at the center. And that's all I wanted to do was welcome you to this beautiful fall day in the high country. And I know you're going to have a great time listening to these folks who are way more interesting than I am. So I'm just going to turn it over and let them get started. So thanks for being here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Mahalik. I'm the University Librarian at UNC Chapel Hill. It is very good to be here, and thank you so much for coming. The exhibit is Tar Heel Cameraman, a discussion and a discussion of the remarkable photography career of the late Hugh Morton. We are honored to have the Photographic Archives of Hugh Morton at UNC Chapel Hill, and it is a great privilege to make it available to researchers. You can't imagine how the Hugh Morton Archive has enriched life, cultural, scholarly life at UNC Chapel Hill. It's really had a lot of impact and will continue to do so for generations. It's a great privilege to make it available. So I want to begin this afternoon with a sincere thank you to Julia Morton and her family for their gracious generosity in placing this extraordinary collection with our library. So would you stand and let us thank you? Catherine Morton, representative of the family today, thanks so much. We're delighted that you're here this afternoon, and we're delighted to be here. It is indeed a lovely day. And we want to acknowledge and thank the great folks here at the Turchin Center for the Visual Arts. When we decided we should go on the road with a Morton exhibition, we immediately thought of Appalachian State and the Turchin Center as the most appropriate inaugural venue. They said an immediate yes when we approached them. And as you will see later this afternoon, if you've not already seen it, our exhibition is a stunning collection of 86 Hugh Morton images. It's on display in the galleries above us. Stephen Fletcher did a magnificent job with the exhibit. He's at the UNC Library and selected the images and worked closely with the staff of the Turchin Center to develop this exhibition. Thank you, Stephen and Hank Foreman, Hannah Crowell, Neely Andrews, Megan Stage, Brooke Bauer, and the rest of the Turchin staff for being such wonderful partners. So let's give them a hand. Also, thanks to the Friends of the Library staff at Chapel Hill, for Peggy Myers in particular, for arranging the reception that will follow this panel discussion. Now I know you're eager to see some of these photographs and to hear some of the stories that our panelists can share, so I'm going to turn the program over to Bob Anthony, the curator of the North Carolina collection at Chapel Hill.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. And first I want to also thank the Turchin Center staff. They have been absolutely wonderful working with on this collaborative exhibit. We couldn't have asked for a better place to inaugurate exhibitions of Hugh Morton's wonderful photography. But thank you, Hank, and your staff, and the people here at Appalachian State. And also, Catherine, once again, thank you to the Morton family for entrusting us with such a treasury, and it really is a treasury. What we want to do this afternoon is have three people who knew Hugh Morton very well share their reminiscences, their stories, their anecdotes about working with Hugh Morton on various projects and initiatives. He was involved all over North Carolina in various activities. We're going to ask them to speak just briefly, give us a quick capsule summary of their relationships with Mr. Morton, and then we will show a few images on the screen and kind of ask them to respond and reminisce about events related to that event or related events. Now, our challenge, frankly, is selecting images first for the exhibit from over 250,000 Hugh Morton images that we have. Now, I thought we might lose Stephen Fletcher over this as he was struggling, but he got through it, and he is the person primarily responsible for the exhibit upstairs, the selection of those. He worked with Fred Stipe, one of our staff members from the library here, and Jay Mangum and others in our digital library and archives at Chapel Hill. And this is just a sampling. But toward the end, we're going to tell you how you can see other images. You'll be able to see 86 upstairs, but then we also have a website. But I'm going to stop there and just briefly tell you about the three people to my left. I think you know them. Many of you already know them. You know them, may know them very well. Starting at the far end, Woody Durham, for more than 40 years, the voice of the Tar Heels. His voice has been heard in more North Carolina homes, probably than any other. Remarkable career in broadcasting in North Carolina, and we're delighted that he would take this Saturday afternoon to come to Boone to be with us for this event.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Jack Hilliard in the middle spent 42 years as a producer and director at WFMY TV in Greensboro. A close friend of Hugh Morton, is our favorite blogger. We established a View to Hugh blog, which Stephen and his colleagues post images where we need help identifying people, and Julia Morton, Catherine, and others will respond. Jack comes through. He comes through with suggestions. He posts on our blog, so we'll tell you a little bit about the blog at the end, and hope you will go to that to learn more about the Morton collection. And then to my immediate left is Betty Ray McCain. I think many of you know her. She served as 8 years as the Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources under Governor Jim Hunt. She knew Hugh Morton well and worked well with him on many public activities, education boards, numerous cultural organizations. So, Betty, I'm going to start with you. Would you give us a kind of a quick summary of your connections with Hugh Morton over the years? And
thank you, Bob. And can you all hear me? One time I asked an audience if they could hear me, and they said, one on the front row said, "I can, and I'll trade places." But I loved Hugh Morton, and I loved Julia too. And they are Renaissance people, and I love Catherine. And we're so glad to be here at Appalachian, because you all have loved and recognized all that Hugh Morton has done for this state and this county and this country. And so it's just a privilege to talk about this Renaissance man. I have known him for a long time and very happily followed. If he were for it, it was right. And so I wasn't old enough to help much with the battleship when it came, but I do remember as a child that when the battleship came up the Cape Fear River and he brought home the USS North Carolina, which we call the Showboat, and it's now our World War II memorial. If you had a family member that died in World War II, their name is in the midships on the USS North Carolina. But when Hugh saw that it was getting ready to be mothballed and probably scrapped, he thought of a way to save it, and he raised a great deal of money. They say $500,000, but I think it was a little bit more than that. And they kept telling the Ark restaurant that was down at the end of the river where it was going to be put, where they were going to keep the USS North Carolina. They had to move because when they turned the boat around, it was going to hit the restaurant, and they didn't move. And all of a sudden, that was the biggest cold whomp you've ever seen. He knocked the tables over and the furniture over, and the people were scared to death. But he had already told them, and nobody sued. So, so everything, and I've worked with him since then on many other things, but I wish you were here now, and I'm so glad that Precious Renee Vance is here, who was our Cultural Resources fiscal agent, because they're getting ready. They've already dredged the river, and we could bring up the Kitty Hawk if we just had Hugh back.
Thank you. Jack?
My first encounter with Hugh Morton was actually on the telephone. It was September of 1958, and Bob Quincy and Julian Scheer had just put out a biography of Charlie Justice, and Charlie was my boyhood idol, so I had to get the book. But I was living in Asheboro, and the little bookstore in Asheboro didn't get their supply of the books until after I had already left Asheboro and gone to Chapel Hill for my freshman year. But one of the first things I did when I got to Chapel Hill was to go down to the Intimate Bookshop on Franklin Street, and that's the old Intimate Bookshop with the squeaky wooden floors. I got the book, went back to my dorm, and sat down and read it straight through. I was bowled over by the pictures in the book, and they were credited to Hugh Morton. Well, I knew who Hugh Morton was, but I had never met him. I had clipped pictures out of the newspaper with his little 8-point byline photo by Hugh Morton. I had seen the State magazine. My family was an early subscriber to that, and he had numerous covers on that magazine. So I wanted to tell him how much I enjoyed the book, and so I thought, what can I do? I know he lives in Wilmington, but I don't know much more than that. So what I decided to do was to call Grandfather Mountain and talk to the receptionist, and maybe I could just tell her to tell you how much I enjoyed the book. So that's what I did. I called information. Those days you dial the phone, and if you dialed 0, you could talk to a real person. And so the lady on the phone said, yeah, I can connect you with the office. So she did. Spoke with the one young woman on the phone, told her why I was calling, who I was, and she said, well, Mr. Morton's here in the office. Do you want to talk to him? I said, wow. Yes, I do want to talk to him. So we had a 10-minute conversation about the book and about his friend Charlie Justice and my idol. And that was just the first of many conversations and many exchanges of letters and near the end, some emails. So that's about how it started and continued for 47 years.
Woody?
Yeah, that deserves some applause. Jack Hilliard and I happen to have a lot in common. First off, I was at Channel 2 in Greensboro from 1963 until 1977 before I moved down to Durham Life Broadcasting and later full-time with the Tar Heel Sports Network. And Jack was my producer-director for most of those years when I was doing sports. But the one common bond that we have and that we left for history to see is we did a 1-hour documentary on Charlie Justice's career. It was only intended, I believe, Jack, as I remember, for 30 minutes. And we're midway through the show, and we haven't even touched on some of the things. And so Jack told me during one of the breaks, he said, we're going to make an hour out of this. And that's what we did. And I've never worked with anybody quite as comfortable, quite as a big part of it than Charlie was. Charlie really, he was great to have on that program. I think Jack would agree with that too. Well, how did I meet Hugh Morton? Well, I met Hugh Morton. I was involved when I was a student at Carolina. Jack and I were both in the same class of 1963. And I met him there because I was very much involved with WUNC-TV as a student with a lot of the games. I did the games on Saturday afternoon that they played back on Sunday nights, the football games. So I got to know him a little bit then, but I really got to know him when I graduated, came to Greensboro as the sports director, and then he and John Pottle had a spring event, an outing at Esiola Lodge. John would provide the rooms for the coaches and the media folks to come. And, of course, Hugh was taking care of everything. At that time, there was only one golf course in the area, and it was Linville. And so we just had a great time. And all of the ACC football coaches, 8 of them at that time, never missed it for a long, long time. And then some of the coaches started going other places, or they went to places that they didn't want to go. But a lot of the attendance dropped off, particularly as we got a little bit more busy. But the two things that stand out in my mind, in 1981, Hugh, who had been a motion picture photographer, actually when he was in World War II, and he could still use the motion picture in addition to the still camera, he made an interesting documentary on John McNeely and the Hawk. It was the hang glider that flew and taught this Hawk to come and land on the control bar of it. And so Hugh got a sponsor of Piedmont Airlines, and it won a prize, a very distinguished prize, during a film festival in Italy, of all places. And he was nice enough to send me a framed picture of the plaque that they got, and it listed the names. Arthur Smith provided the music. I just did the narration, and Hugh did practically everything else that was done. But one other moment I want to remember, along with Hugh and Julia, they invited us to stay at their house one evening up on the lake at Grandfather. And we did, and the next morning, Hugh took Gene and me in his car, and we went around, and he showed us a lot of the places where he took the pictures of Grandfather and a lot of the things. We went to the very spot of his favorite picture of the viaduct, underneath it and off in the woods and so forth, and it was just a great thing. He was a great friend, and I miss him a lot, and it's interesting that nobody has stepped forward yet to make even an effort to try to take his place in sports photography and other photography in this state.
Good. I've been told that Hugh Morton had a camera in his hand most of the time from his teenage years on up until his last few months. So we're going to start with an image showing him with a camera in hand, the one on the screen now. But he used that camera to help, let's see, nope, I'm not, there we go, to help draw publicity to many, many events around the state, festivals, cultural activities, sports. This is an image of Emmett Kelly Jr., a clown at the 1968 Azalea Festival in Wilmington. The festival had been first organized 10 years earlier in 1948, but because of his skill with the camera and his connections with public relations, newspapers, journalists around the state, he was able to get images promoting events distributed widely around North Carolina. This second image is also from the Azalea Festival. As the festival took life, the organizers of it began to invite Hollywood celebrities, film stars. This is somebody you may recognize, Andy Griffith. He is 32 years old in this picture. This is in the 1958, and this is the year after Andy's Face in the Crowd film, and then right about the time of No Time for Sergeants. But I want to ask our panelists, were any or all of you involved with him in helping promote events? Did you call on him to photograph at activities you were involved in? Did you go to the Azalea Festival or attend it there and see how he worked?
I never went to the Azalea Festival, but we've called on him many, many times. Because the battleship now needs some work done on the hull. And I've missed him every day because they're going to put some sort of, my engineer child explained it to me, some sort of dry dock thing so they won't have to take it out to sea. And they can work on it right there. But when Renee was working with Cultural Resources, we needed money, and I was so interested to see they raised $315,000 to bring it in, and we had to raise $6.5 million to replace, to redecker, and we had to get the teak from Myanmar, and so Hugh and Jim Hunt said, "Don't get caught at it," because that's old Burma. And they had a little 3 weeks hiatus when they let their Nobel Prize, Peace Prize winner out of jail and out of home detention. And we had somebody from North Carolina in Myanmar, old Burma, and they quickly bought the the teak. And so Jim Hunt and Hugh looked at me and said, "How'd you get it?" And I said, "Well, we had a friend over there, and before the gate closed, we got it." So now she has a gate, and now we need you back to do the kill.
Jack Woody, how did you approach it?
The Azalea Festival in 1955. I don't recall having seen Hugh there, but I remember the beautiful flowers, and all the photographers were there from the local newspapers, and even the TV station at that early from Wilmington was there. But like I say, I don't recall seeing Hugh there. We were there on the Sunday, I think, is just before it was closing.
I can't think of anything specific. The one thing that does come to my mind a little bit is Betty, I think, was with the school children of the state. You know, their pennies, their dimes, or whatever they had was part of that fund that was raised to bring the battleship North Carolina.
And they got a free pass.
Yeah.
If they had given a nickel or a dime, they got a free pass once the battleship was
Right.
fixed.
Those
And,
passes still good?
I don't know. You ain't gonna pass for no middle school child.
Okay. Well, of course, Hugh Morton is well known for his work at Grandfather Mountain, establishing it as one of the top scenic attractions in North Carolina. This is a 1967 photograph that he took of Mildred the bear. Now, I think I'm right on this story that Mildred, the original Mildred, came from the Atlanta Zoo. Catherine, you may correct me, please, if I'm wrong, and there were two, and that the male escaped, and that the female came and was very docile, and they had thought it might, just wander around the place and be wild, but it ended up following people, and so he recognized the potential for that. When did you first visit Grandfather? If you did, what was your experience there? Did you meet Mildred? And
I've got a funny story. We had an exchanged pulpit. Our Presbyterian minister exchanged a pulpit with a Presbyterian minister in Scotland, and the first thing he said was, "I want to go to your highlands and meet the bear." So, Mom and Daddy had a cabin over in Blowing Rock, and so he said he loved the highlands and he met the bear. Something about the swinging bridge. Is that?
yes, yeah.
My brother and his wife had twins, and I got in the middle of the swinging bridge with the twins, and twins can communicate without talking. And one went this way and one went this way, and if you ever heard about an old lady standing in the middle of the bridge screaming, "Come back here!" They didn't get hurt. They're fine.
Good. What about experiences?
First time I was there was in August of 1953, which would have been just about a year after they dedicated the bridge. I didn't go across it. I started and got part of the way and decided to go back.
It was interesting. We were visiting Grandfather. I went the first time as a young boy with my mom and dad. As a matter of fact, it was a dirt road up to the top of Grandfather then, rather than a paved road. But it was magnificent to stand up there and just to be able to look out and see so many things. But one thing that remains in my mind is, and Gene was with me, and I think it was during one of the times we were staying at Hugh and Julia's, and he took us around, and we went into the bear area. I think Mildred had already passed by then, but there was a gentleman there who was a professor from up in, I may be wrong about this, in northwestern Wisconsin or something like that, but he was an expert, considered an expert on black bears. And part of what he had done to write a book was he went into some of these caves where the bears slept, and he slept in there with them, if you can believe that. But I said, it's one job I don't want.
I heard Julia say once that many a time when she first met someone, they would see Mr. Morton and recognize him and say, "Well, hello, Hugh," and then they'd turn to see and say, "Hello, Mildred," because they assumed that the bear had been named for her. I could tell she didn't necessarily like that, but because she had preceded the bear in Mr. Morton's life. But that's Grandfather Mountain, of course, is as I said, one of the top scenic attractions, and Hugh Morton and family and his wonderful staff developed the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games, and you just mentioned that. This is a scene from the Highland Games, and just reminds us of the important Scottish connection with North Carolina.
He has 120 clans that come for the Highland Games.
120.
At least 120, and it's truly amazing because some of you may subscribe also to the magazine, The Highlander. For the name like McCain, you know, we keep the Sabbath and everything else we get our hands on. You know how that is. But you know, the Scots are so tight. It's amazing that they say they make their reservations, and Catherine can confirm whether years ahead, so that they can be close to the Highland Games.
Highland Games. Mm-hmm.
In fact, my husband, of course, was of Scottish descent. And he said when he played football, their favorite call was "Get that quarter back."
Well, we've heard reference to Hugh Morton's involvement in the effort to save the USS North Carolina and to bring it to Wilmington, where it's berthed now, and the state has it as its battleship memorial. And if you've not visited there, it's definitely worth a trip. And when it was brought back in 1961, there was a young man who is in this photograph who greeted it. It was a little windy and rainy, and he borrowed a coat and a cap from a Coast Guard person. And my understanding is that when it came time for the event to begin, that a Coast Guard person up the way saw this man standing a little too close and told him to get away because the governor would soon be there and needed to be there. You may recognize this as Governor Terry Sanford. Did any of you happen to be in Wilmington about that time, or the battleship was brought in? But we heard about the incident with the restaurant, and
now they've dredged the Cape Fear River so that we could bring in the Kitty Hawk if we just had you back.
Yeah, I can remember as a school kid being told to save nickels and dimes and bring in to help contribute to bring the battleship to North Carolina.
I do have to tell you one thing. My daddy, a good Democrat, didn't talk ugly about most folks, but he said, so I asked him once if he'd ever seen the Brown Mountain Lights. Y'all are familiar with the Brown Mountain Lights. They were supposed to be the Cherokee Braves who didn't leave or whose souls were still there. I said, Daddy, have you ever seen the Brown Mountain Lights? No, he says, that's just Terry Sanford looking for something else to tax.
When the proposal came up to relocate the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, Hugh Morton was convinced that this was not a good idea and that the lighthouse was going to collapse when they tried to jack it up and move it. So he showed his ability to work with people of all political persuasions and causes that he passionately believed in. This is then Governor Jim Hunt with a illustration of the lighthouse and where it should go. This event was organized by the Travel Council of North Carolina, a 1981 event. But here you see who the two co-chairs are of the Save Cape Hatteras Lighthouse that Hugh Morton put together. These co-chairs raised over $500,000 in private funds to save the lighthouse. So you see his ability to pull people into events and causes, and a persuasive man that he, in activities he enlisted in. Now, Betty, we've just shown a photograph of you as the beachcomber. What's the story here?
Well, we were trying so hard to save the lighthouse by a different method than moving it. And in fact, I went down there to tell it goodbye, and my children thought I was crazy. I said, well, there are a lot of people who live in Wisconsin and Massachusetts and all around. They've come to tell it goodbye, too. But what Hugh wanted to do here was to put these groins underneath the water, and they would be in these sleeves that I'm sure that's something they invented at North Carolina State. It was some kind of textile, and you would squirt liquid, what would become concrete, in there, and it would deflect the water so that the lighthouse would no longer erode, that the water around it would no longer erode. And so we went up there to see what they had done in Lake Michigan, and this was what that was taken when we went up there. But the funny part was we flew in either, Catherine may remember, I don't know whether it was the basketball team or the football team from Charlotte's plane. y'all have never seen such big seats in your whole life. And they were 2 and 2 like this, and after every 4 seats was a place to eat. But we tried very hard, but as we all know, the federal government has promised us $14 million to move the lighthouse, and so they were bound they were going to spend that $14 million to move the lighthouse. It's now perched upon the aquifer, the only aquifer for the area, and they had to take down some of a virgin forest of water oaks that were right there. So I'm not real sure, but I did feel a little bit better about it when I found out a man from Farmville, NC, was working for the American Chimney Company that moved it. Because if they understand our language, that's helpful.
I remember with one of Hugh's slideshows, he had a magnificent picture of the lighthouse in its original location, and he said, but we'll never be able to get this picture again because it's back in the bushes beside the cell tower.
And the Fresnel lens from that lighthouse were taken out during the Civil War. And Dave Taylor, Dr. Dave Taylor from Little Washington, the original Washington, excuse me, is the great-grandson of this doctor who was sent to take them out. And they couldn't find them for a long, long time, thought they had been flooded by Lake Gaston because he owned some land up there that was flooded later. But now they found them. They were in his barn. I don't know where they are now. They were suing to try to get them back.
Well, I think one of the characteristics of Hugh Morton was that he knew how to get into events. He had the personality and the skills to make the connection. So as a skilled photographer, he was able to go to sports events, and we'll get to those in a couple of minutes. But he also was at political conventions, at inaugurations, public events like that. This is actually a photograph of the Reverend Jesse Jackson at the 1972 Democratic National Convention in Miami Beach. Betty, I think you were there.
I went there, I did, and when we got there, it was very interesting because we had people we'd never seen before that were delegates during Nixon's time. And they disappeared. We never saw them again after that. But when we got there, there were police standing in all the bushes around the convention center. And it looked like a policeman with a green skirt on, an atomic gun, an automatic machine gun. But anyway, it was really interesting, and we nominated. I couldn't understand why they were so upset because we nominated McGovern. We had no chance to win. And so I called my husband that night, and I said, do you think I can come home? And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning when we nominated him, so it was late. And he was a physician. He was used to going back to sleep. So I said, you reckon I can come home? He said, it's a long pause. He said, yeah, honey, come on home, but come at night with the oars muffled. Man, it's...
1972 was a year also that, if I'm remembering right, Hugh Morton chaired the Democratic delegation in Miami Beach. But earlier that year, or the fall before, he had announced his candidacy for governor of North Carolina. Jack, do you remember much about that effort? He withdrew, but he had initially announced, and were you covering it?
In December of 1971, he announced that he would be a candidate. The 1972 primaries and election were unique in that at one point in time, there were as many as 12 candidates. There were 2 primaries and a unique news conference. In January of 1972, Hugh came over to Greensboro and scheduled a press conference in the WFMY studios. Invited in all of the local media, and we videotaped it 30 minutes. And once we completed that, he got everybody together and he said, okay, folks, you all have been a part of something unique. This is the first time that a candidate has bought time for a news conference and then paid to have it on the air. So that was unique. I don't think anybody's done that since. But also, when he withdrew in February, WFMY was able to get the first television interview with him, and we had a program that we ran on Sunday afternoons called Newsmaker, and our news director, Charles Whitehurst and Dave Wright, interviewed Hugh after he withdrew and got all the information about why he had withdrawn and that sort of thing. So I had the opportunity to direct both of those programs, and I knew I was a part of something special when I was doing that.
I believe you told me once that he said that had he stayed in the campaign to raise the money, he might have had to sell Grandfather Mountain. And that
He might have said that sometime.
Yeah.
I remember a quote he said, I knew that Skipper wouldn't have a problem with money, being Skipper Balls, and I did. So the prudent thing to do would be withdraw, and that's what I did.
That's what he did. That's what he did. This is a photograph he took, which I understand may have been the last photograph he took of Terry Sanford, who died not too long after that. Since then, we know that Governor Holzhauser, who was from here in Watauga County, has also died. And I'm not sure the exact occasion, but it's apparently at the governor's mansion in 1998. But it's the type of photography that you find throughout these 250,000 images of some of the movers and shakers in North Carolina's history. This is a non-North Carolina photograph. It is a photograph of the Apollo 14 going up. Jack, you were there?
Yes, that's one of my favorite places in all the world, Kennedy Space Center, Central Florida. I was there, Hugh was there. I didn't know he was there that day, but I remember it very well. It was my first trip to the Kennedy Space Center. I would make 24 additional trips after that, but this one was special because the commander of Apollo 14 was Alan Shepard, and in 1989, Alan Shepard came to the Morehead Planetarium, and I got to meet him and told him that I was there that day, and he said, "I'm glad you were there. That was a special day." But this picture is taken from what they call the press site. It's 3.5 miles away from where the actual launch took place. And you can't describe that. A picture doesn't do it. TV can't do it. You have to experience it to appreciate what that is, because you can see that thing taking off 3.5 miles away, and there's dead silence because the sound hasn't gotten to you yet.
And the earth shakes.
It does. It does. The ground shakes. If you look in the water, and most people don't, because the Banana River is running right up here. If you look in the water, you can see it ripple as the sound wave comes across. Most people are looking at the rockets, so they don't see that. But that's a neat shot. And like I say, I did not know Hugh was there that day. I wish I had, because I would have liked to have been with him.
Well, he caught that movement. He also photographed a great deal of sports events, great number of sports events across North Carolina. This is a photograph from September of 1948. And Woody, would you tell us who these people are? And I think many of us know Choo Choo Justice, but there may be a few here who need a reminder. And
Well, the other people in the picture are the authors of Choo Choo, which was a very well done book as far as going back through his career, not only in high school football in Asheville, but of course then going to the Navy and playing for the Navy teams, and then coming to Carolina. Bob Quincy is the gentleman on the left side of the picture, and Bob was at that time a writer for the Charlotte News, and we wound up working together on my first year on the Tar Heel Sports Network when he was the color analyst. And he was working for a radio station in Charlotte, but also the Charlotte Observer. And I only had him at my side for 1 year because the Observer thought that he should be following other teams rather than Carolina and writing stories about them. So, and the other gentleman is Julian Shear. And they had been friends for a long time. Julian was from Charlotte, And I think at that time, Jack, what was Julian? Wasn't he involved in a government agency?
Oh, well, no, he was actually an assistant in the athletic department, publicity department.
Oh, at that time.
At that time.
Okay.
He later went with NASA, but
Yeah, that's what I was thinking
yeah,
about.
he did that later. But when he did the book, he was, I guess it would have been Jake Wade's assistant.
Probably.
Yeah.
Okay. And then another photograph of Choo Choo Justice and Art Weiner. You're going to see some of these, if you've not already seen the exhibit upstairs, you're going to see some of these sports stars and other public figures in other photographs. This is a couple of floors above us, and we do hope after we get through the panel, you'll have time to go to the reception and exhibit upstairs.
Rather interesting thing about that picture with both of them being in their blue jerseys.
Oops.
And it's interesting, some people see photographs that Hugh made of Charlie Justice playing in a game, and he wears a dark blue jersey with a number 22 on it. They can't understand that. Why was he wearing a dark blue jersey? Well, that was the time coming out of World War II that not all of the dyes were available to color people the jerseys and things like that. So they could not get any Carolina blue dye at that time, and so that's why they had the dark blue on. But fortunately, they got it in place for the senior season that Charlie and Art had in 1949.
Another interesting story with Art Weiner. Charlie and Art were good friends off the field as well as teammates. And Art Weiner has a terrific sense of humor. And he was perfect for a series of charity roasts in the early 1980s that they did with Charlie. And one of the funny stories that Art always liked to tell, don't know whether it was true or not, but it's pretty funny, I thought. Art said that he would start off by saying, "Did you ever wonder why there are so many great justice action pictures taken by Hugh Morton?" And then he says, "Well, there are two reasons. One reason is that Hugh Morton was a world-class photographer and probably never took a bad picture. But there was another reason." Art said, "There was a player on our team who never caught a pass, never threw a block, never made a tackle. His sole purpose in life was to let Charlie know where Hugh Morton was on the sidelines."
Betty talked about large athletes. This looks like a very large athlete, Justice, and this is Jack Hilliard with a statue of Charlie Choo Choo Justice.
My claim to fame. I think probably this is the only picture Hugh Morton ever took of me. Picture was taken in June of 2004. In that spring, I was working on a video tribute to my dear friend Charlie Justice and his wife Sarah. Charlie had passed away in October of 2003, and Sarah passed away in February of 2004. So I sent Hugh a note, and I said, "This is what I'm doing. I need your advice as to what I can do, and then I also need your photographic help with some pictures." Well, he called me back on a Saturday morning. I was at home, and he called, and as he always did, he said, "Hello, Jack, this is your friend Hugh Morton." He said, "I've got the pictures that you wanted. I'm going to put those in a package and send them to you next week." Then he said, "I'm going to be doing something next Tuesday that you might be interested in." He said, "I'm going to take a group of the Justice Era players over to John Paul Harris's studio in Asheboro, and we're going to look at the progress he's made on the statue. Would you like to go?" And it took me about 1,000th of a millisecond to make up my mind. And so we were to meet at the McDonald's on Highway 64 in Asheboro. So when I got there that morning and walked in, it was like something I couldn't imagine. There was Bob Cox, Art Weiner, Joe Nykirk, Paul Rizzo. These were my boyhood heroes. They're still my heroes. But we loaded up the cars, caravanned over to John Paul's studio, and looked at the statue, and John Paul's sitting back there too. I described John Paul's studio as his home, but it's also his workspace. It was described in a magazine one time as a cross between Swiss Family Robinson and Sanford and Son. But anyway, we went in. We took all of the players looked at the statue, and all of them had comments to make. And John Paul would taking notes. Then Hugh decided to take out his camera, and he wanted to take pictures of all the players. He took out his light meter and started reading the light, and realized that it was pretty dark in there. So he said, "I'm gonna have to go out to the car and get my light." So he goes out to the car, and he comes back with this light, a reflector, I guess about a foot in diameter, and it is dented and banged up and scratched, and it's terrible looking. And Nykirk says, "Hugh, did you carry that thing through World War II? It sure looks like it." And Hugh said, "No, I it's been up the mountain a few times, but no, we didn't carry it in World War II." So anyway, he took the pictures of each of the individual players, and then he wanted to take a cover shot of everybody. So he was setting that up, and while we were setting that up, Bob Cox said, "Hey, Hugh, do you have one of those new digital cameras?" And Hugh said, "Yeah, I got one of those." He reached down his hand in his bag and pulls out a digital camera, holds it up. So this is a good one too. It has all the bells and whistles. And he put it back down in the bag and continued to work with the regular camera. Well, he got the picture taken that he wanted. I figured we were probably through at that point, and he turned to me and he said, "Now, Jack, let's get one of you."
Yeah. Okay. Well, here's a photo he got of John Paul Harris, the artist, the sculptor, back in the audience here with the Choo Choo Justice.
Yeah. Anyway, if I had finished just quickly,
sure.
He took the picture, and 2 or 3 days later, I got in the mail one of these, and I'm sure some of you may be familiar with the Grandfather Mountain logo on the upper left and the Mildred the Bear cancellation over here. And it's my personal photo of
Hugh Morton. Let's
Nice.
see. There you are.
Yeah. Well, here's the artist with the Justice statue. This is actually out of order, but it shows Hugh Morton announcing for governor on the state capitol grounds in Raleigh. But Woody, we're going to move into to several sports photographs, where if you'll share some observations of how he approached sports photography. I understand that he was almost a player on the court. He was on the edge with his legs stretched out or his arms or whatever.
Yeah, let's back up just a second to that previous shot.
Sure.
There may have been other times, but this is the only time I'm aware of when two players from the same hometown in North Carolina, different high schools, of course, in Gastonia, played for the national championship. James Worthy, of course, on the left side of that, and then Sleepy Floyd on the right side. And earlier, before the Coach Smith and the players, Worthy among them, and Jimmy Black, the point guard, the other, waiting to go into the media room after John Thompson of Georgetown had finished his conversation with the media and his players. And it's interesting. There's a picture there, and it may be in the exhibit upstairs, or I'm not sure, or downstairs. But anyway, I have a framed copy of it in my office at home, and people who have come into my office look around and they say, "Woody, what are you doing with a picture of a loss?" I said, "What are you talking about, a picture of a loss?" They said, "Picture there." Said, "Look at the expression on Coach Smith's face." Said, "Look at the players. James Worthy's got his head bowed like that, and the net's around his neck, and so forth." I don't know why he didn't see the net around Worthy's neck, and so forth. And it just shows you what the toll it took to win the national championship for Carolina, the energy and so forth that they put into it. But two players, and I later went to a celebration that the city of Gastonia had for those two young men, and they deserved it because of what they had done for their teams. Sleepy was at Georgetown, of course, and James was at Chapel Hill. And
look how big they are. That's what I could say.
yeah, they were. And I'll tell you what, the next shot here, this is a game against California, and that is high-flying Vince Carter. And just look at where he is in relationship to where the basket is, that he's going to stuff that basketball through the net. And he was one of the most phenomenal players as far as doing this kind of acrobatic play that I ever had the pleasure to watch. And this is one of Hugh Morton's outstanding. The story of this is a February 1984 game at Carmichael Auditorium in Chapel Hill. Carolina, with 8.5 minutes to play in the game, is 16 points down to Virginia. Ralph Sampson in Virginia. Carolina comes back to win the game, and Carolina goes ahead in the final minute of play when Michael Jordan takes the ball away from Rick Carlisle, the Virginia guard, and that's the dunk that followed the steal that put Carolina ahead. There's one more thing that you'd have to watch the video to appreciate this, because I don't think there may have been a picture, but none that I've ever seen, because Hugh was at the opposite end of the court. See, he always said at the end of the court in Carmichael, the basket to which Carolina was coming offensively. And at the other end of the floor, Virginia had the ball for one last shot. And it's interesting how in Ralph Sampson's career, the Cavaliers had a great deal of difficulty getting the ball to Ralph Sampson for a last shot. Well, Virginia had a timeout left. They called the timeout, set up a play, and a guard finally had to take the shot. Time was running out. Carolina had Sampson well guarded. The ball hits the rim and is up in the air like that coming off. Ralph Sampson, if you remember, was 7 feet 4 inches tall. Michael Jordan grew 2 inches while he was in Chapel Hill. He is 6'8". Michael Jordan went up behind Ralph Sampson and took the ball out of his hands. And one of the most phenomenal plays I can ever remember seeing. And Carolina came from 16 points down in the final 8.5 minutes to win that game.
Another interesting story about the Jordan picture. Hugh had talked with the folks at WBTV in Charlotte the week before, and they were there at that game doing a feature of their Carolina Caravan or whatever they call it. And Hugh says before the game, Michael came over while they were warming up and spoke with him, and they talked for a couple of minutes. And Hugh mentioned the fact that WBTV was there doing the feature. And so when they parted, Hugh said, "Have a good game, Michael." After the shot, Hugh says, Michael came running back up the court, brushed by him, and said, "How was that?"
It was really interesting. If you look at the video of that play, you see one flash go off, and it's Hugh Morton's camera when he's making the picture of Michael up in the air like that. Now
Isn't that the most reproduced one he ever did?
Yeah, I think so. Athletic picture, because it's still used pretty much by a lot of sources even today. This next guy, Kelvin Bryant, it's against Clemson, and it's not against, of course, he set a Carolina record with 6 touchdowns in the season opener that year with against East Carolina. Wonder where he was last Saturday. But anyway, he had the best. Everybody talks about great running backs and everything like that. Kelvin Bryant from Tarboro had the best combination of speed and power that I've ever seen. He could come through the line, and if a player was trying to commit to him on a tackle, he could stop and be at full speed in 2 steps, going one way or the other, left or right.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've seen Hugh Morton photos with Betty in it and also with Jack, so we got a couple with Woody Durham in it. Here's you with football coach Bill Dooley, and you told us about Bob Quincy a little earlier.
Hugh made that on the deck of the tent when the tent was raised where the grandfather clubhouse is now for that. And Bob, as I told you earlier, was going to join me and be the color commentator for the first year of my being on the network. And Bill Dooley was there, as were most of the coaches for that outing that Hugh and John Pottle had. and it was a memorable picture for me.
And here's another one of you with a tall basketball player.
Yeah, that tall player is Warren Martin, and I'm just happy to know that Warren did something in a game that I had the opportunity to interview him about afterwards. Here we had a roast in Chapel Hill to benefit the Volunteers for Youth, and it fell together very quickly. It was decided, not by me, it was decided by our folks at the Tar Heel Sports Network that they wanted to do this to raise money for the Volunteers for Youth, and Charlie very quickly agreed to come. John Swafford, of course, is on the other side. The current commissioner of the ACC, was the UNC athletic director at that time. Gene Corrigan was also there. Bones McKinney was on the dais as well, and two players who came to represent were in the midst of their playing careers at that time. Buddy Curry, the great all-ACC linebacker, was representing football, and Matt Doherty was there representing basketball.
Okay.
One more comment about that Rose picture. I don't know if you ever had any corresponding with Charlie Justice, but if you did, you'll know that you would write him a note and he would answer you on the bottom of your note. So in November of 1985, he was on the coach's show, and I sent him a note telling him how much I enjoyed it. And he wrote me a note back and said, "I need some good tales on Woody for a roast in January. Can you help me?"
You must have given him some, because he did have some the night of the roast.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've got to just tell one more tale. Always Julia and Hugh would let Charlie Kuralt come up, and they had a little cabin or something, whatever it is, Catherine, on the property at grandfather, and he would have some downtime there and get to write some and, do whatever. So Hugh was speaking at Charlie's funeral, and, Hugh always had, I just loved his sense of humor, and he said, "Well," said, "we sure gonna miss him." Said, "Gonna miss him a lot." Said, but he never wrote a whole lot about that other school down the street with the dark blue. He never wrote much. He said, "But Nixon had to have some place to study law."
Well, I wish we could look at more photos and hear more from our panelists, but we do want you to have an opportunity to enjoy the exhibit upstairs. As I said, there are 86 photographs. We also are having a reception, but before we adjourn for that, are there any memories or thoughts that anyone in the audience wants to share?
Let me recognize somebody that just came in while we were getting started. This is Luther Hodges, Jr., down on the front row, the son of our former great governor.
Dan Vance.
Mr. Vance, I think you drove Mr. Morton to a number of occasions, so I've been told. Is that? Was he patient? Was he focused on planning what he was going to, or was he like talking with you? What was his personality like when he was going to something, a big event, or how was he as a passenger?
Well, he slept coming back, so he
Okay,
was
he slept coming
tired.
back. Okay.
Going down, we'll stop and eat here. He liked to eat now.
Okay.
He loved the cafeteria. We spent many happy meals over there, but
Okay.
he was a joy to be around. I just loved him to death.
Okay.
I'm Charlie Clement. I practice law here in Boone, and had the great pleasure of being Dan Moore's counsel the last 2 years of his administration, and met with him every morning for those past 2 years. And I never will forget one time the phone rang at the governor's office at about 8:15, and it was Hugh Morton returning Governor Moore's call. And the governor said, "Damn it, Hugh, aren't you going to let us make connection on the parkway? You're holding up the whole Blue Ridge Parkway." He said, "Governor, I love you." But he said, "When you figure out a way to put the parkway up in the air, then we'll work something out." And that was the precursor to the
viaduct.
to the viaduct.
Yeah.
Let me just close here if I can. I ran across something About in 2006, Harris Prevost boxed up a number of athletic photographs that he was hoping that we could work out with the UNC coaches shows in some way, shape, or form, but we weren't able to do that. But in that, he included a column that Ron Green Sr., by far one of the better sports writers in the entire country, now retired from the Charlotte News after having worked with Bob Quincy, the Charlotte Observer, having worked with Bob Quincy on the Charlotte News. And he wrote about a fishing trip that Hugh took him on their lake, Grandfather Lake. I won't read you all of that, but I'm going to read it'll just take a second to do this. Ron says in his column, I asked him about things he's done, and he responded with fascinating stories. He helped save the battleship USS North Carolina from being scrapped and rowed it from the West Coast as it was towed to be moored in Wilmington, where it is now a major tourist attraction. He helped save the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. He was a driving force behind the ridge law that prohibits building a structure higher than 35 feet above the ridge line in this state's mountains. He built the popular mile-high swinging bridge on Grandfather Mountain, the mountain he owns that rises majestically above his lake. He introduced the Highland Games and singing on the mountain and hang gliding on his mountain. He has served on the State Board of Conservation and Development. He's a master photographer and prowls the sidelines with his camera at North Carolina football games or sits on the floor at Tar Heel basketball games. And every photographer seated on the floor at the offensive end of the game always reserved a spot for Mr. Morton. Didn't make any, he could get there 5 minutes before the game started and his space was already reserved. He's produced books on UNC sports in the state and movies on wildlife. He's brought injured eagles, bears, deer, otter, and other wildlife to a preserve on his mountain for tourists to see. One of the most influential men in state politics for many years, he ran for governor but aborted his campaign early when it became apparent he might have to sell his beloved mountain to finance it. That's Hugh Morton.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So we're right on time. I want to thank again the panelists for what I think was a wonderful job of sharing in too little time, but highlights in the life of Hugh Morton and a nice summary, Woody, of the significance of the life of a true giant in North Carolina. Also want to thank again the good folks at the Turchin Center for the wonderful job they've done with the exhibit. Hank, as far as we're concerned, you and your staff can have next week off. Okay. Stephen, Fletcher, I hope you're as pleased as we are with the exhibit and the good work that you've done on it. Also want to thank Dr. Jerry Butler. I'm bifocal, so Jerry, where are you? Okay, Jerry Butler is a dentist, lives here in Boone with his wife Phyllis, and helped us get the word out about our event, and we thank you very much for that. And he's also a UNC and Appalachian Bridge, and it's been great to develop a relationship with him. So thank you, Jerry, for that. If any of you are UNC alum and want to talk with Jerry about activities that he has here in Chapel Hill, this is my kitchen clock to tell me the hour's up, so our time is right good. And John Paul Harris, if you would stand, we had the lights down earlier. We saw you in the sculpture. So. Finally, we have had some questions about could people get prints of the Morton exhibit, Morton photographs in the exhibit. We have an arrangement with a vendor called 1,000 Museums. You could go on the web. We, this week, have been adding more to that site. If you'll give us a couple more weeks, we'll have even more up. You can order nice prints that are frameable if you are interested in those for your home. Also, we have in the lobby, thanks to the Appalachian State Bookstore, copies of several books of photographs by Hugh Morton, also a book by Woody Durham that hasn't been out too long. So if you're looking for good holiday presents, now's an opportunity. You can avoid the mall crowds by patronizing the Appalachian State Bookstore. And finally, I mentioned the View to Hugh blog. If you're interested in knowing more, we've got several thousand. How many thousand images are available through the online collection? 8,000 Hugh Morton images are online that you can go and enjoy. I'm going to turn the microphone back over to Sarah Mahalik.
Catherine, are you sure you wouldn't like to say a few words?
No, I was just making sure. Okay.
Okay, all right. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you all. It was a wonderful panel. We have a gift.
Thank you.
This is the new, updated version of the North Carolina Gazetteer. I think Bob has the idea that you all might be out traveling around the state of North Carolina, and you might not have the full knowledge of the state to that. Mr. Morton did, so we've given you a book to help you with that. And yes. One final assignment for the three of you. If you would pick an image from the exhibit that you would love to have and let Stephen know, we will send you a digital copy of the image, okay? Well, thank you so much, and all of you, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I know you're going to love the exhibit. Farewell.
After you have enjoyed the reception for a few minutes, if you'd like a guided tour of the exhibit, Stephen Fletcher will be in the gallery, and I'll do a walkthrough with you and talk with you about individual photographs. Thanks so much. Okay, we're on the ground level floor. You need to go to the reception on first floor, exhibition on second floor. There's an elevator right out here, and then of course there are internal steps. So you want to go to 1 for the reception, 2 for the exhibit. Thanks again.